Well, all right. Good evening. Welcome to Uptown Chats. I want to thank all of our donors who have joined us in the past year, as well as our continuing donors, friends, and allies. Uptown Chats has been a vehicle for us to use to link community residents with influencers in this city. And today we decided to use it as a vehicle to welcome so many of our new donors and friends and allies that we are so grateful to have had join us over the last year. I want to thank Con Edison, um, who has sponsored our Uptown Chat series for the past 2 years. And I want to thank you all for supporting We Act. I'm going to begin by giving you a very brief overview of our organization, and then we're going to highlight some of our key programs. So, WEACT's theory of change is that by organizing community residents, we can build healthy communities by assuring that they participate meaningfully in creating sound environmental health and protection policies and practices. So we are an organization that prizes organizing and policy because we need both to create sustainable communities. And I'm showing you here the photograph of the North River Sewage Treatment Plant, which was our first campaign, our first community campaign back in 1988. And for those of you who live nearby, or even if you live elsewhere in the city, I'm sure you've gone down the West Side Highway and seen this plant. And if you see the blue arches that are filled in, that was part of what happened through our lawsuit, where we got the city to commit $55 million to fix what was a brand new plant, because those arches were open with the sewage smells going right out into the community. And so one of the retrofits was to enclose those and develop other kinds of infrastructure that was needed to ensure that there were no odors and high levels of unregulated emissions. Next slide. So how do we do our work? We focus on organizing, advocacy, research, education, and training. Today, we have more than 800 members who live in Northern Manhattan neighborhoods, and we have several hundred others who live in other parts of New York City and in the nation. We really keep linkages with our members through monthly meetings every second Saturday. We meet from 10 to 12:30, and we meet through community working groups, such as our Healthy Homes Working Group and our Climate Justice Working Group. And that is a way that we are able to take the advice and the leadership of community residents and our members to really advance our campaigns and our policies. We also have a strong emphasis on education and training because we understand it's not simply organizing community residents, it's about giving them the information so that they can tell their story in a really informed way that policymakers and the media can hear and understand. So we have a very strong environmental health and justice training program. It can last 8 weeks where we give a certification to our members, generally a cohort of 30 to 40 go through that training. And we also lead that training each year, semester long with about 90 students in the ninth grade to 12th grades in a local high school called Wheels. We also have a very strong worker training program where we've trained several hundred workers in construction activities as well as in solar installation. And of course, part of our education work is translating research into policy through a variety of research centers at the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. So, breast cancer, children's environmental health, and basic research into environmental risk factors. And we translate that research through workshops and through policy and legislation. And again, that research happens through community-based participatory research and with our academic partners, primarily at Columbia Mailman School, but also at George Washington University and Mount Sinai as well. And of course, advocacy is our strong suit with city, state, and federal policy teams. We opened a federal policy office in Washington, D.C. 6 years ago. And for the past 12 years, we have been coordinating a um, 60 organizations who are members of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, where we work to help them develop their capacity and to also provide federal policy information and access to bring them to Washington to talk to their elected officials and be part of the policy making process. Next slide. So to give you a sense of the areas we focus on, we did some focus groups some years back to determine what community members felt were key areas of a sustainable community. And these were the ones that we identified that We Act had some expertise and could provide some leadership on these issues. Now, of course, we're not working on all of these issues at once, but each year we do prioritize many of these issues. And so, of course, um, you probably understand that in the last few years, we've prioritized climate justice, healthy homes, toxic free products, water quality, and sustainable land use. Next slide. And so, what have our impacts been? Well, one of our first campaigns was suing the Metropolitan Transit Authority and really running an 18-year campaign that got them to switch to alternative fuel vehicles, invest in pollution control retrofits. And today, the entire bus fleet has been transformed to hybrid diesel. And now you will see a few hybrid electrics on the road as well. And the city intends to transform the entire fleet to hybrid electric in the coming years. Climate justice has been a key guiding principle for us. We developed a Northern Manhattan Climate Action Plan with 400 community residents in East Harlem, West and Central Harlem, and Washington Heights Inwood. And out of that program, community residents prioritized energy. And so we've developed the Solar Uptown Now program, and which we've been able to leverage the solar installation trainings from our worker training program to ensure that the installations we're doing in uptown neighborhoods are done by the workers we have trained. And we're very, very proud to say that some of those workers joined together to develop a workers' co-op, which is called Solar Uptown Now. And they have incorporated and are bidding on jobs, and they're working throughout New York State. And we continue to provide support for them at We Act. So we're very proud of those 12 or 13 young men and women. We've also helped pass the really bold and landmark, according to everyone around the country, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And we have staff who are on those working groups working to define what an environmental justice community is, working to define how the 40% commitment to frontline communities will be used and how that will be administered. We also help to support and pass the landmark Climate Mobilization Act, known as Local Law 97 in New York City. and we serve on that advisory committee as well. We have also developed two environmental justice pieces of legislation, which have created um, a permanent New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which I chair and which will be holding its first community town hall on February 25th. And we will be doing strong outreach with our fellow advocates on that advisory group to ensure that we have a strong community support and input on where how we will advance environmental justice in New York City. And then finally, we have been working to have impact on having healthy homes in New York City. We've lobbied the New York City Council to pass a strong lead poisoning standard, which was Local Law 1. And that was a while ago. But we have found that the city was not enforcing that law. So in the last 3 years, we have worked to support at least 5 to 6 new amendments and new pieces to Local Law 1 that are more protective of our children. And then finally, we've campaigned successfully to pass the asthma-free homes bill and a variety of other bills around toxics at the state legislature as well. Next slide. Again, opening green space. Many of you know the West Harlem Piers Park, our community-based plan where we organized 200 residents to ensure that we had a beautiful aesthetic park instead of a parking lot on our waterfront. And so again, 200 residents came together, and that really led to getting the city to create and fund the West Harlem Piers Park, which is just a beautiful addition to our community. We also were able to work with the community over at Esplanade Gardens in Central Harlem to make sure that the demolition of the Mother Clara Hale Depot was a safe one and to help rebuild it as the nation's first LEEDs rated bus depot. And LEEDs means leadership and energy and environment and design. And again, as I was saying, we've helped pass New York State legislation banning BPA as well as flame retardants in children's products. We passed a bill banning PFAS in food packaging and also helped pass the Period Product Labeling Act in New York State. And much of that was done with the coalition that we have co-chaired called Just Green Alliance, which is an incredible coalition here in New York State. And then on water quality, of course, you all know we've had a crisis in our public schools. And so we were able to help pass legislation requiring tests for lead in water in every public school in New York State and ensured that we close the loophole so that water is tested for lead use at the first draw. And so again, ensuring that children in our public schools are safe. So I'm going to introduce you to 3 staff you'll hear from today. Sonal Jessel, who's our Director of Policy. Next, Taylor Morton, our Director of Environmental Health and Education and our wildlife expert. And Karine Taylor, Director of Federal Legislative Affairs in our Washington, D.C. office. So we're going to hear from the 3 of them today who are going to highlight some of our key initiatives. So Sonal, please start us off.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming once again. And Peggy kind of started us off perfectly to talk about one of our first kind of main topic areas we're focusing on this year, the past couple of years especially, and that is climate justice, which, just a basic definition, that is, the idea that the impacts of climate change don't affect everyone evenly. It particularly impacts people of color, low-income people. And in addition to that, those are the communities that tend to have contributed the least to what is now our climate crisis. So our work in climate justice generally is a lot of different things, but this is kind of our broad way of thinking about it. Peggy mentioned the Northern Manhattan Climate Action Plan. So this was our big planning process that came after Hurricane Sandy, where community members were really concerned about what climate change is doing to the neighborhood, how it's affecting people, how we're going to be ready for extreme weather events. And so a lot came out of those planning processes, and what we learned was that folks are interested in making their homes retrofitted, prepared for what is climate change, to be adaptive and resilient to climate change, to have good jobs and work in these new emerging industries of renewable energy, for example. And all of this is done in the framework of just transition, which is the idea that we don't want to leave anyone behind as we move into a new type of way of powering our homes and moving into new economies, moving away from economies that have contributed to the climate crisis. So within that work, I'm going to talk about one specific initiative, which is our Heat, Health, and Equity initiative. This is really addressing the idea that extreme heat is this growing issue. Particularly, it is increasing in severity, frequency, and duration. This is something that is established by the New York City Panel on Climate Change, our nationwide panel on climate change. It's something that people just have been seeing, and I'm sure all of you have felt it as well. And what we have in New York City that I'm sure a lot of you have also felt is that we have the urban heat island effect, where it's much hotter in the cities than it is in rural areas that have more vegetation, for example. So we're dealing with a compounded issue in New York City. Something that people don't really fully know or realize is that extreme heat is actually the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. It's what people call the silent killer. It leads to many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of fatalities a year. And one important thing, and one reason why we're really involved in extreme heat, is because the impacts of extreme heat are also not happening in an even way. There is a disparate impact of people of color with the effects of extreme heat, whether that be like your health or your, the cost of things, or your ability to cope, your mental health, things like that. So when we talk about who's at risk to extreme heat, if you see on the left side, that's kind of the list that we normally see: older adults, children, people with chronic illness, people working outdoors all the time. But the orange box is really what we're working on at WeAct, is that there's a much bigger story here for who's dealing with extreme heat. And it's people that are living in older apartment buildings that are crowded, neighborhoods with less green space, neighborhoods with a lot more air pollution, industrial polluting sites, people that have been exposed to air pollution across their lifespan that affects our health. Like for COVID-19, people are talking about that. And also just generally people that are dealing with so many different hardships, whether that be housing insecurity or food insecurity or water insecurity, or all of these different things people are dealing with. It tends to affect the same people over and over and over again. So we very much view extreme heat as this sort of compounding issue that's impacting our communities, particularly in Northern Manhattan, which has been identified as a very heat vulnerable area, particularly East Harlem and Central Harlem. And just one statistic for you all to kind of wrap your head around this is that New York City found that for about a 10-year period of time, 50% of the deaths attributed to extreme heat were of Black and African American people, which in proportion to the population in New York City, they're only about 25% of the population. So we know there's some type of inequality happening there. So what we generally believe is that it's a justice issue, and particularly a climate justice issue, and that is where people of color are impacted most by an issue, and that is leading our legislators, our policymakers, our decision makers to not care as much about fixing this problem and really mitigating what lower income people and people of color are dealing with. Extreme heat is a perfect example of that. So that's why we're doing the Heat, Health, and Equity initiative, which is about a 3-year-long initiative that is just kicking off to really address the impacts of extreme heat in Northern Manhattan. And we're doing that in multiple ways, because you can address extreme heat with our community members by, making sure they're prepared for the extreme heat events, but you can also do a lot to mitigate the problem, right? We ultimately need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and address the climate crisis and keep it from getting worse. So we're thinking about this in multiple ways, as how do we prepare our communities, but also how do we mitigate the problem? And so that's why we're focusing on two separate policy initiatives that we believe are going to help kind of help our communities address extreme heat. So the first is a low income home energy assistance program. This is a state level program that provides utility bill assistance to some degree to people that qualify with their income. And this will help people get an AC unit, for example. And the cooling center program is something the city does, which is offering a free place for people to go to cool down. Both of these programs are great in theory, but both are not adequate. They're not doing as much as they could. We believe that the home energy assistance program should be providing people with more efficient systems to cool their home instead of old kind of polluting AC units. And the cooling center program is just not utilized enough. So we're thinking about how do we make people use free resources more often. So in this initiative, to kind of pull it together and decide what we're focusing on and what our messaging is, and bring communities along with us, we have convened these planning workshops that were in all different parts of Northern Manhattan, and brought in lots of community members to talk about, like, when it comes to extreme heat, what are you dealing with? What are you thinking about? What are your biggest issues? And over and over and over again, we heard energy insecurity, issues with my home. People, powerful people just don't care. So that's kind of the systematic issues, racism, and my health is impacted. So there's a lot there that we learn from people in these planning initiatives. And that's really what's moved forward our work in extreme heat, is that folks generally feel like they don't have a seat at the table to decide how to address extreme heat as a rising issue in their neighborhoods, and that they want to feel safe in their homes when it comes to it being a really hot day in a way that doesn't impact their wallets and cost so much money, which our current system tends to do. So overarchingly, that's what we're doing in the Heat, Health, and Equity Initiative, is we're addressing this concept of energy insecurity, which is the idea that people are unable to adequately meet basic household energy needs. But this is also going beyond just the household, and we're thinking about this on a neighborhood level. So how do we make sure that people access the energy they need to stay cool in and outside their homes, so in their homes, in their neighborhoods, when it comes to the cooling spaces. And the additional thought here is that we believe that our residents have a human right to sustainable cooling, not just any kind of cooling, that we need to be implementing cooling systems that help our residents also mitigate the climate crisis. And we bring them forward in this process of making our homes more efficient and reducing our use of fossil fuels. So that is the Heat, Health, and Equity Initiative in a very quick nutshell. And I will pass it on to Taylor.
Great. Thanks so much, Sonal. All right, so my name is Taylor Morton. I am the Environmental Health and Education Director here at WEAC for Environmental Justice. I've been around the community for about 5 years in a lot of different roles, but really excited to be in this role. So when we think about environmental health and education, WEAC's Environmental Health Department has existed over a really long time. And we'll talk a little bit about what environmental health is and why it's so important to what we do at WEAC. So environmental health focuses on relationships between people and their environment by really promoting human health, well-being, and fostering safe and healthy communities. And health is really at the heart of environmental justice issues. It's where we see a lot of the tolls, where we see a lot of the impacts when we think about quality of life, when we think about life expectancy and all of these other tolls around environmental injustices and moments of environmental racism, right, and movements around environmental racism. So it's really a key point in who we are and what we do, and it has been for a while. And And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the environmental health initiatives that we work on, and as well as some of the education initiatives that we work on at WEACT. So specifically around environmental health, I'm only going to be talking about one initiative tonight, but we work on a Healthy Homes campaign. We have a long-lasting environmental health working group that really focuses on environmental health issues that residents want to work on. And over this past year in 2020 and in the next year, we're really going to be looking at the 2021 mayoral election and the environmental health issues that residents want to see in the new mayor. We're also focusing on Beauty Inside Out as far as our survey and campaign. We'll talk a little bit more about the Beauty Inside Out campaign and work specifically, but understanding that it relates to women of color and exposure to toxins through hair care products and beauty products. We've also been working on product testings and focus groups with residents, and that is around hair care products and other products that women of color use. And women of color, even thinking about women who are pregnant, adult women, and girls who are women and femme identifying, and really looking across the spectrum at health impacts of different products and what's driving folks to use certain products and understanding some of those cultural pieces. We have a lot of collaborations with our academic partners, especially at Mailman School of Public Health and with Columbia University. I have a lot of different centers that we engage with. And we do a lot of dissemination of research to residents and dissemination and translation of research to policy in the environmental health department. The environmental health department is also paired with the education department. We've been a long-lasting force in education and over the past 20 years with our environmental health and justice leadership training, our EHJLT, if you've ever heard of it. But out of that work, this has really, we've really expanded to looking at climate education policy and getting a better understanding of the ways that we can serve young students of color, young teachers of color, and other folks who have a stake in education who need to be teaching about climate justice and environmental health and environmental justice education. And we also offer general education programming to folks who are interested to learning more about environmental health, environmental justice, climate justice, and some of these topics that really need to be brought to the attention of the wider public. For now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our Beauty Inside Out campaign. So our Beauty Inside Out campaign really had a good foundation in 2019, and we started working with Yale School of Public Health, but its focus is on looking at cosmetics marketed towards women of color. And really understanding the harm that certain cosmetics pose to women of color, and that harm is disproportionate when we look at the impact of beauty products and healthcare products on women of color. And understanding that there is a very Eurocentric sort of standard of beauty that drives the marketing of certain products. And so we're thinking about hair straighteners, we're thinking about skin lighteners, and all of those other things. And before we hop into that, just wanting to explain a little more, what is a toxic product? So toxic products are substances and like chemicals that can be harmful to our health. And so we see toxic products in hair care products and beauty products. We see them when we think about food packaging, and we think about toys and all of the ways that material things can negatively impact our health. So this is sort of a specific scope when we're thinking about toxic products, but we definitely have a storied history around toxic product use as well, especially with toys. And I highly encourage you all to take some time on the WEAC website to explore some of our gains that Peggy has mentioned in her presentation. some examples that we see when we think about skin lightening creams, hair relaxers, and other feminine care products, right? We see chemical exposures like mercury, different parabens and estrogenic chemicals, phthalates, all of these things. And they're also traced back to sort of these concepts of colorism, thinking about hair care preferences, odor discriminations, all of these sorts of things. And this list is not exhaustive at all, but sort of a peek into some of the toxins and exposures that we are looking at through our work. And to talk a little bit more about what the work is specifically. So in 2019, we really work with Yale School of Public Health to design a survey for youth and design a survey for adults on what women of color and femme-identifying women are using. How are they thinking about their own products that they use? What's the storied history of the products that they use? And have there been any health impacts that folks have experienced? In 2020, we were able to get all of the adult surveys collected, and we're still collecting youth surveys. So if you know anyone who is a young person who is identifies as a woman or femme-identifying individual, please, who lives specifically in Northern Manhattan, please have them reach out to me. I'll leave my email in the chat. But in 2021, the exciting work that we're getting to, we're partnering with Mind the Store to really target and have some conversations with major retailers. And that work is really just getting started on how to get products off the shelves. How do we dive into this work at the national level? We work really well with with the DC office on these issues as well. And what you'll expect to see in 2021 is a lot of dissemination of the research that we found in 2020 and a lot more information on fact sheets and workshops and all of the ways to be more aware about the products that women of color have been using and some of the impacts that it's been having and different ways that we can move things in a healthier direction for our community. And I think that's all I have for this presentation. I'm going to pass it over to Corinne.
There. Sorry. Good evening. My name is Corinne Taylor, Director of Federal Legislative Affairs for We Act in the DC office. Really happy to be here to share with everyone tonight about our work, our federal policy work. So just to provide a timeline, no, this is moving too fast. Okay, so I wanted to provide just a timeline of our federal policy work to give an understanding of why not only is the DC office important, but how it intertwines and connects to the work that we do in New York. For those who are policy wonks, Waxman-Markey was a really divisive climate bill that was introduced in 2008, and it really expressed the need for more environmental justice voices at the federal level, and that precipitated the founding of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, which We Act is the anchor and administrative organization for. The DC office was founded and established in 2012, and so we've had a DC presence since then, and it really puts us in a unique position as an environmental justice grassroots-based organization with a DC presence. And I see our role as the eyes and ears, not only for the New York office, but then for the broader environmental justice community who don't have the capacity and the ability to be present in federal policy. So that's just some of the work that we've done. We've done a number of campaigns around the soot rule. The Clean Power Plan was a really important rule that we participated on, really working to make sure that communities of color and environmental justice principles could somehow be embedded in that. And up until the current time, we've also grown from a staff of typically 2 people to 4 people. And most recently, we've worked around making recommendations to the Biden administration, which we're quite happy about because now we have the ear of an executive branch who care about the environment. So we look forward to working with them more. This is the federal policy team. As I said, we've grown to 4 people, really beefing up our strategy and our legislative work to prepare us to really engage not only with the Biden administration and the executive branch, but Congress and federal agencies. And I'll talk more about that as we go into the slides. As mentioned, we are the administrative arm of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum. This work is really important because for the organizations that are members, we help them and facilitate not only their connection to their congressional offices here in DC, but we also help them engage around national policy. And we provide capacity support for them. We help them with communication support. We help them, with any kind of preparation they need when they have hearings on the Hill. And we also help them even raise funds. That's one area where we really are looking to help beef up the support for environmental justice organizations who are typically underfunded, but do quite a bit of work similar to us. We do a lot of work. So capacity support is something we try our best to give members of the EJ Forum. Just some quick accomplishments that we had recently. Last year was a really interesting year. The COVID pandemic placed a new type of strain on our office in terms of interacting on the Hill, where we would typically have fly-ins and meetings. We had to transition very quickly to webinar style. I'm sure everyone is feeling it, especially right now, we're on a webinar, but just doing it in a way that still connected our community perspective with the attendees and the members. We also had a really, I think, great mobilization around the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. We were a part of a coalition that brought in over 50 EJ organizations to testify against the Trump administration's rollbacks on NEPA. We did voter engagement. We flew out to Detroit and helped register voters as part of a 5-state mobile voter registration campaign. And we just really wanted to see and connect not only the broader issue around voter engagement to environmental justice. So we do a lot of things, but we do it in a way that uplifts the organizations that we connect with and centers EJ. Just last year, and some of you may have attended this, we released our Green Jobs Report, and this report will drive a lot of our policy work. We ACT and members of the EJ Forum co-authored this report that really highlights what a just transition should look like, where funding should go, and there are some really good case studies in there about organizations within the EJ Forum that have workforce development programs and solar training programs. And many of them are, again, very underfunded, but because of the needs of the communities they serve, do quite a bit in terms of upskilling and even remediating some issues around folks who didn't get, math training and all of that to ensure that they can pass tests that would help them get certified, not only in through their OSHA card or solar training, et cetera. So if folks are interested in learning more about how we see green jobs to be a necessary part of addressing the just transition and also environmental justice, please check out our Green Jobs Report. Right now, things have changed dramatically in less than 2-3 weeks, we've already seen a very strong commitment from the executive branch that we've not seen, of course, in the previous 4 years. The executive order that just came out last week on the 27th, which really centered environmental justice, is something that we are paying a great deal of attention to, particularly around the provisions of the Civilian Climate Corps, where we see a lot of value in that in terms of having volunteer and training opportunities and paid opportunities also for young people to help them address the climate crisis, resiliency, and reforestation efforts in the country. So we're paying attention to that, as well as the White House's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice and Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice. The Biden transition's commitment to providing 40% of benefits to communities, of course, is an interest of ours as well. And we intend on making recommendations on programs we think the 40% should go to, and also help better articulate who those communities are. We'll be doing this in coordination with the EJ Forum as well. And federal engagement, I've said this a few times, but the only time that I've visited the EPA in the last 4 years was to protest. And we are completely in a different place now, where we have, frankly, people that we've worked with are now within the administration. We also have people, of course, who see the climate crisis as something that needs to be addressed from the full scale of the federal government. So not only are we looking to build and rebuild relationships with the EPA, but the Department of Energy is a place we're concerned about. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is a place we want to see more EJ implemented in, especially with the recent announcement of the finally having an Office of Public Participation. And then, of course, HUD and HHS, Health Human Services, are places where we see a connection to the work in Harlem, whether it's around the LIHEAP programs that Sonal had identified, or with our Solar Uptown Now program, making sure that there's more funding for our workforce development programs at DOE. So our office, in addition to our congressional and outreach and executive branch, we're going to be reacclimating ourselves with the federal agencies. Of course, our legislative priorities reflect the issues that are coming up in Harlem. So equitable climate and energy legislation is a great concern of ours. Developing the green workforce, Beauty Inside Out, to complement the work that's happening with Taylor and our environmental health work. We are working to strengthen FDA requirements around regulating personal care products. So Jan Schakowsky's Safe Cosmetics and Personal Care Act is something that we've been really working on in the last 2 years, but we'll continue to push for this coming 117th congressional year, hoping to pass very substantial legislation around personal care acts. LIHEAP, again, is something we care a great deal about, and weatherization programs to really address the energy burdens that communities of color and low-income residents are experiencing, who are typically paying way more out of their pockets for their utility bills. Toxic chemicals, PFAS, is of course something we're paying attention to, and finding ways to address the environmental justice legacy pollutions. The Environmental Justice for All Act and the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act are bills that we've supported in the past and will also support through this congressional year. And we're also going to start doing more qualitative analysis of congressional members' contacts with EJ organizations. Typically, folks are scored by how they vote, but beyond how they vote, we want to make sure that they're more thoughtful relationship building. And so we're doing a very purposeful job of not only introducing and reintroducing EJ Forum members with their congressional members, but walking through those members in terms of understanding environmental justice and trying to facilitate more in-district relationships. So that's another thing the EJ Forum that we'll be doing on behalf of EJ Forum members this year as well. And another thing we really care a great deal about is expanding cumulative impact legislation. We're really proud of Nikki Sheets of the EJ Forum and of course the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance and their work in New Jersey, and we want to see how we can duplicate cumulative impacts across the country. And we've looked at various groups within the EJ Forum who will lead efforts to introduce similar legislation in their states. So we keep it quite busy in DC, but again, we are complementing the work happening in New York and also supporting the EJ Forum. So look forward to any other additional questions around that in the Q&A portion.
Well, thank you, Corinne, Sonal, and Taylor. We're now going to spend the next 10 minutes or so with a question and answer format. So If you'd like to ask a question, if you put it in the chat, I will then give you the option to unmute. So I'll give you the option to unmute with a pop-up box, and please click yes. Okay. So one question we have from Janine Whitman. I don't know, Janine, if you're on board, but she asks, as a local teacher, she would love to know about opportunities for student involvement with middle school students. Taylor, that sounds
Yeah,
like you.
that is me. Well, Janine, I taught middle school for a couple of years, and middle school is quite structured, so we don't have anything at the ready for middle school students. However, if they are in New York State, our New York State Climate Education Coalition is really going to be focusing on how students feel about climate justice and education and environmental justice education. And so students will have an opportunity to get involved with the coalition, to work on a survey where their thoughts will be included in our campaign and the work that we do. And we do take some internship and volunteering opportunities for high school students. We don't quite have the structure for that for middle school students, but I would love to discuss how we could create that structure for middle school students. So feel free to connect and shoot me an email, but our work in New York State with the coalition will allow for student involvement. We also have programming with the EHJLT. So if you are wanting to offer students an opportunity to do that as a class, we can discuss that as an opportunity. And then there will be a survey component of our climate education work where students will have an opportunity to give their thoughts and contribute to the campaign.
Okay. There's a question from Cheryl Parham, and I think I saw Cheryl earlier, if you'd like to unmute and ask yourself.
Hi, yeah, it's Cheryl Pam. It's actually two related questions. One is, how do local groups join the EJ Forum? And then how does it work? Are member organizations allowed to propose legislation specifically?
I'll answer that. The EJ Forum, we have an application process. Typically, we want members who are people of color led. So we look closely at not only the board membership, but the staff, and then the mission of the organization and if they have an understanding of environmental justice principles in their work. So we can definitely share the application with you if you're interested in joining. It's reviewed by our steering committee, and then they vote in terms of if that organization should join based on the criteria. And in terms of the projects that we work on, every year we have an annual meeting, and at that annual meeting we do a lot of internal discussions on our priorities for the next coming year. And so, for instance, cumulative impacts has actually been something that has been discussed within the EJ Forum for a while. But then we saw a pathway because of the success that occurred in New Jersey. And there was a critical mass of folks who really wanted to do that work. We try our best to drive the campaigns and the work that we do within the EJ Forum based on the interest of the members so that they themselves can lead on it and participate. We don't want to just feed an idea out and people say yay or nay. It really is an inclusive process where we ask organizations what they're currently working on and seeing if there's like a national strategy that others can participate around.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Dwayne Norris with Soulful Synergy. Dwayne, are you with us? Well,
Yes,
I'm not. Okay,
having a little unmute difficulty. Sorry about that.
no
How you doing
problem.
this evening? So yeah, as you said, my name is Dwayne Norris. I'm with a company called Soulful Synergy. And we've been doing some workforce development training funded by NYSERDA around clean energy jobs energy efficiency and thermal and electrical systems. And people have been asking us now with this EV stuff that's coming, how do we make sure that people are trained to take advantage of this opportunity? And so we've been approached by people saying, you know, there's this NYSERDA pond, there's this funding from the governor, all this EV work is coming into these disadvantaged communities. I was wondering if We Act has taken any position, yay or nay, for or against all of this kind of effort. And if it is coming and we can't really do much about it, and these EV stations are coming to these types of communities, how do we make sure that our people are at the front line for these type of jobs and making sure that they're positioned with the skill and the access to the employment opportunities that are coming, similar to the CLCPA work?
Sonal, would you like to take that?
Yeah, that sounds like one for me. I will address it on like a really broad level because there's so much in there. I'll just say kind of generally for the EV work, yeah, we know that the governor has been starting to kind of like pump a lot of money into electric vehicles, particularly there's announcements of putting some uptown. We Act has generally not decided to pursue advocacy work around private electric vehicles. We have found that our community members are generally more interested in the public transit, and that's why we focused on buses, fixing subways, for example, even bus depots. We have a history of doing great work with bus depots. Another thing we're working on now, which is related to that EV money that's kind of getting pumped into the state, is around clean school buses, so electric school buses, which is something that's a major concern of tons of our community members. I'm sure you've heard it before with the diesel exhaust that comes out of these yellow school buses. So that's something that we're trying to take advantage of when it comes to the funding that's coming in from the governor, particularly that's from like the Make Ready program, the settlement from the VW Volkswagen's lawsuit, all of this work, we're hoping to kind of take advantage in that way and be focused on our public transport rather than our private vehicles. I do agree that we do need to like make sure our community members are involved in like get the jobs. You know, we do workforce training, like OSHA certification and solar installation training that we offer, but we also partner with organizations that do that work and, you know, relay community members to those organizations if we're not doing the training at that time. So there is kind of a lot of work we're doing in that way, but also doing it on a higher level of like advocating for policy around making sure that if there is a bill that's coming through that is putting something in a community, that it is investing in the community. Like, for example, some of the maybe Karine can speak to this a little bit more, but like a green jobs report, which is outlining some ideas around, you know, let's make sure that if we're putting solar in Northern Manhattan, the people who get the jobs to put solar are from that community, and have that actually be written in the laws rather than relying on our governmental agencies to like make the right decision there. We think it should be just written right in. So that's kind of what we're working on at this point.
And we're definitely concerned about the transportation sector, particularly from the fact that it produces so much of our transportation related pollution around greenhouse gases and just emissions in general. Federally, we've advocated around the clean car rule, or the standards that the Trump administration tried to fight really aggressively. And so we stayed more on the policy side. As it relates to EV charging stations, there's just this really big issue of the cost of these vehicles, and if our communities can even benefit from it because the costs are so high. So as there is more emphasis on EV infrastructure, I think we're going to increase our participation in that, but we do focus mainly on how buses and modes of transportation are impacting our community.
Thank you. Rachel Amar asked, how can We Act partner with the Biden administration to maximize federal legislative and funding opportunities? Rachel, are you still with us? Well, I don't know, but I think, Karine, you might take that. How do we partner with the Biden administration to maximize legislative and funding opportunities?
Well, we've already been participating in that transition period now that it's over. And with the executive order, the Justice 40 initiative is something that we want to have a say in, for not only the interests of Northern Manhattan and the programs and initiatives that we have that have been very underfunded, but we also want to make sure that other programs like the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, they have a worker training program that a number of EJ Forum members have that has been staying at, I think, about $3 million for about 20 years, and their impact is $100 million in terms of impact. So in terms of how we're looking to engage with the Biden administration, we intend on making very clear recommendations around the Justice 40 investments, and then working within the federal agencies that already have existing programs to make sure that they're more targeted to communities of color and EJ communities broadly. The Department of Energy has lots of funding opportunities that don't always get to our communities because of the complicated grant processing and even the notice for grant submissions. And so we want to do a better job of working with them to demystify those processes and to get more community-based organizations aware of them so that they can apply. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think we have a lot more leeway with this administration because of their clear commitment to addressing climate and environmental justice.
Thank you. Catherine Skopik. Catherine, are you still with us? Would like to ask your question?
I asked a few. Which one would you like?
Well, I know you asked one about expanding solar program.
Yes, I think this is one of the all your programs are so significant. I'm just totally blown away by these presentations. They're excellent. The solar installation program is so needed, as we all know. Can you expand upon this, or will it be, or how has it been going, the one that you have? Could you say a word about it? Thank you very much, Peggy.
Sonal, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we have a number of different kind of solar projects going on now. One that's been around for a while is the Solar Uptown Now program. And that has at this point installed about 16 solar panels on 16 roofs, solar panels on 16 roofs of HDFCs uptown. And so that one's kind of still ongoing, and that's partnered with Grid City and a couple other groups. And then we have our community power project, which is a little bit newer, and that is installing solar panels on top of NYCHA buildings, 3 total in the whole city. And that one's kind of just more, that's a newer program that's getting up and running. The difficulty with that is that the way that NYCHA gets its power and the agreements that they have with the New York Power Authority is makes it hard for the NYCHA residents to actually benefit from that solar. So it's a very complicated process. That's really, you know, something that it like is something that definitely needs to be kind of like figured out as we move into this new world. But that's kind of like why we're doing the work. So we're installing solar panels on a couple of NYCHA buildings, and they're going to power affordable houses around NYCHA. But we will be training NYCHA residents in solar installation work and some higher level jobs within the solar industry in an effort to kind of grow our presence in the solar industry. So those are kind of 2 projects that are going on now. There's, you know, lots more in the pipeline, but those are the 2 main ones. I mean, we're always interested in how we keep expanding solar because it is so important. And this is all part of the process of like, how are we electrifying our buildings and doing it in a way that's going to be affordable for our lower income communities. So solar is going to continue to play an important role.
Thank you so much.
Also, Sonal, I have one for you. Insay Witherspoon, I don't know if Insay's still with us. She runs the incredible Children's Environmental Health Network in DC. Insay, are you still with us?
I am. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this excellent array of the fantastic programs at WEACT. It's an honor to just listen in.
Thank you. I know you had a question about our priorities.
Yeah, I mean, as you have to prioritize so much for so many important populations, how do you go about the process of strategic planning every year, especially when there are, you know, things that come along that are unexpected and can get in the way of the plans that you have with the important community work ahead.
So we're laughing because there's always going to be an emerging issue that kind of upends what we thought our priorities were. And so one of those issues is the crisis with public housing and NYCHA, and the fact that folks are living in horrible conditions without the repairs that they need. Some people right now are experiencing no heat. So NYCHA is just a priority. We have made it a priority to develop a voter engagement plan, which we are now working to achieve. And we plan to, and we are working with our Healthy Homes Working Group to develop a NYCHA Uptown agenda that we will work to ensure that candidates for city council and for mayor will respond to. And Taylor, I don't know if you want to pick up on that question at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say, I mean, that's a piece of work, right, that really, when COVID hit at a critical time, really changed the way that we engage in this work, and in some ways, the scope of this work. And I think a little more to speak to the environmental health department and the focus that we have. It really shifted, right, when we're thinking about COVID and the impact that it's had. And I would likely say the same for Sonal and policy, and knowing that she does a lot of work at the city level. And I think a really key part of it for us is prioritizing the needs of residents, right? They are the lifeblood of who we are as an organization, and the reason why we do what we do. I think over such a shifting year, we've really been focusing on their needs and giving them the platform and the space to really advocate for what they need in such a tough time. And that has been a really big, I think, part of our work in the environmental health department, where those priorities have shifted because of a lot of these sort of larger issues. And we reset and adjust and adapt to the times in order to make sure that we serve our residents.
I'd like to also add that the pandemic, frankly, has made talking about environmental justice a lot more palatable, and people understand it more because we can connect COVID to the poor air quality in our communities. When we talk about indoor air quality for healthy homes, that connects also to the impact of COVID, particularly in Black and Brown communities. So I think having a lens and being able to understand where EJ fits into so many areas of people's lives allows us to take advantage of the national zeitgeist around this one particular issue to just talk about our issues, our 10 focus areas more broadly.
And I'm going to take one more question, and then we will close with Dr. Michael Dorsey's request that we certainly want to honor, and that's having a moment of silence for Cecil. So before we do that, I will take the last question from Mark Dobbins, who I think might be calling us from Spain. Is that possible? Mark, are you still with us from Spain? Well, if not, he wanted to know what's WEAC's #1 priority for 2021. And I know we have a number, Sonal, but maybe you could close by talking a little bit about out of gas.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I feel like I will loosely call this our #1 priority. We have too many #1 priorities. But out of gas is one that is new that's going to make a really big impact, and we're very excited about, which is the idea that we're going to, it's a campaign that's being developed, and it's with organizations, advocates, experts across New York State working towards moving away from gas used in people's homes by 2040, which is a little bit earlier than New York State is generally planning on doing it. But we think it should happen sooner rather than later. So this campaign is one part of this campaign that we're really heading up is this pilot project where we're installing induction stoves. So that's a little bit different from electric stoves, but that's stoves that use electricity, not gas, as well as heat pumps to heat your home instead of using like your traditional boiler in New York City. And this will basically be taking a household, or we're using 10 total, off of a lot of the gas that they use in their homes. And what we're hoping to do is really understand how it works with low income people, what obstacles we're running into, how it benefits their health, because we know gas, using gas stoves, for example, emit really kind of some toxic, nasty substances that are bad for your health. And so we're really, that's how we're starting the campaign, is by measuring that process and really understanding how do we get low income households off of gas, because that's a major question that basically, if any of you have been involved in any of these conversations, is kind of a question that not everyone really perfectly agrees on. It's something everyone's trying to really figure out at this point in time in the state. So we're leading a campaign around that, and really making sure that as we move off of the use of gas and fossil fuels generally, that we do it in a way that's considering lower income people and people of color that are often plowed over in this process. So how do we make it affordable for people? So that's a major campaign that we're launching this year, and it's being led by our policy and advocacy coordinator, Ewa Vosper. And it's going to be a very exciting campaign to see moving forward. We've got a lot of strength behind it. And as Chris wrote in our chat, our membership meeting that's coming up is actually about this campaign, if anyone wants to hear about it more closely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Before we close out, I'm going to ask for a moment of silence for Cecil Corbin Mark, who is our Deputy Director and our Policy and Energy Czar. And we just so regret his passing last October. So we'd like to ask for a moment of silence. So thank you all so much for spending a couple of hours with us this evening. Become a member, just $25. Join our Earth Day 5K walk, which we did last year virtually, and it was a success. So we think it will be again this year. We have volunteer opportunities. We have voter engagement. We have a whole diversity of projects that you can get involved with as a volunteer, as a member, and as a donor. So thank you very, very much for hanging out with us tonight. And we'll be talking to you all soon. We'll be communicating in a variety of ways. So please stay tuned. And thank you so much for being with us tonight.